"You look tired, sir," said the little girl on the plane. The CEO didn't expect that she'd change his life forever. The overhead lights hummed faintly as Lucas Grant stepped into the narrow aisle of the packed flight from San Francisco to New York. It was past midnight, one of those red-eye flights he'd sworn never to take again. But tonight, there hadn't been a choice. The CEO of Grant Dynamics was used to control. Private jets, first-class seats, silent lounges. But a last-minute delay had left him here. In economy class row 14B window seat, he sighed, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal gray coat as he sat down. The fabric of the seat felt stiff, the air stale with recycled exhaustion. He looked every bit the successful businessman. Tailored slacks, polished leather shoes, a watch worth more than some people's cars. But under the sharp suit was a man running on fumes. The weeks had been merciless. Press interviews, investor calls, a major merger barely holding together. His face was composed but weary, his jaw tight from clenching through boardroom battles. He unfolded a newspaper from the seat pocket, pretending to read. His eyes skimmed the words but didn't absorb a single one. His mind was already shutting down. That's when he heard it. A soft shuffle, followed by a small, excited voice. "Mommy, that's our seat." Lucas looked up. A little girl, no more than 4, stood beside him, her curly auburn hair tied into uneven pigtails. She wore a purple dress dotted with stars and carried a backpack shaped like a ladybug. Her wide brown eyes sparkled with wonder as she pointed to the middle seat next to his. Her mother, looking utterly drained, nodded and helped her climb in. "Go ahead, sweetheart." The girl settled in with a bounce, kicking her small sneakers against the seat in front of her. Lucas forced a polite smile, hoping she'd calm down quickly. Then she turned to him, her voice soft but curious. "You look tired, mister." Lucas blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being spoken to so plainly. "I'm fine," he replied flatly, adjusting his seatbelt. She tilted her head, unconvinced. "You don't look fine." He almost smiled, but didn't. Instead, he turned toward the window, letting the reflection of city lights blur across his face. A few minutes later, as the engines began to roar for takeoff, he felt a small tap on his arm. The girl held out something wrapped in a napkin, a half-eaten chocolate chip cookie. "For you," she said earnestly. He hesitated. "That's very kind, but—" "You can have it," she insisted, pushing it closer. "I have more." There was no hesitation or judgment in her tone, just pure, unfiltered kindness. Something about that broke through his fatigue. He accepted the cookie awkwardly. "Thank you," he said quietly. Her face lit up as if he'd given her a gift. The sweetness of the cookie melted on his tongue, unexpected warmth spreading through his chest. As the plane lifted off and the cabin lights dimmed, he closed his eyes briefly, feeling, for the first time in weeks, a quiet peace. When he opened them again, the little girl was asleep, her small head resting against his arm, clutching a stuffed bunny. Her mother in the aisle seat had drifted off too, her face lined with exhaustion. Lucas sat still, barely breathing. The child's tiny weight against him felt grounding. For years, people had seen the CEO, the success, the empire, but not the man beneath. Yet here, 30,000 feet above the earth, a stranger's child had done what no one else had managed. She had looked at him and seen him. The hum of the engines filled the silence as the city lights disappeared below the clouds. Lucas stared out the window, watching dawn begin to rise on the horizon. Somewhere between exhaustion and peace, something inside him shifted. A quiet, familiar ache he couldn't name. And though he didn't know it yet, that small act of kindness from a little girl in seat 14B would change the course of his life forever. When the plane lands in New York, Lucas won't just be leaving the airport with his briefcase. He'll be leaving with something far heavier and far more human than he ever expected. The night after the flight, Lucas couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his Manhattan apartment, city lights stretching endlessly below. The skyline glittered, cold, magnificent, and hollow. The half-cookie wrapper sat on his desk, absurdly out of place among stacks of contracts and quarterly reports. He told himself it was nothing, a passing moment on a plane. Yet something about that little girl's voice clung to him. "You look tired, mister." It had been years since anyone said that without wanting something in return. Days passed, but the quiet echo of that flight followed him like a song he couldn't turn off. Even during meetings when his assistant read updates about expansion deals, his mind wandered back to those small, trusting eyes. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her mother's either, but he remembered the way the woman's head had tilted in sleep, her face drawn but peaceful, her arms folded protectively even in exhaustion. A week later, Lucas found himself walking through the sliding doors of St. Anne's Medical Center, the same hospital where his mother had been admitted for a liver condition. The sterile scent of antiseptic hit him instantly, sharp and familiar. He came often to check on her progress, but this visit felt different. He took the elevator to the 6th floor, his mind preoccupied with donor lists and fading hope. His mother's doctors had begun speaking in guarded tones, words like options and time frame that always ended in silence. As he turned a corner, he heard a voice, soft, patient, familiar. "Okay. Mr. Reynolds, one step at a time, all right?" "You're doing great," Lucas slowed his stride. The nurse guiding the elderly man had light brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, tendrils falling over her temple. Her voice was steady, gentle, almost musical. He blinked in disbelief. It was her. The woman from the flight. He froze, watching as she steadied the patient's walker, adjusting his oxygen tube with practiced care. And then, out of nowhere, a small figure came running down the hallway, sneakers squeaking against the tile. Uncle Airplane. The little girl barreled straight toward him, arms flung wide. Lucas barely managed to catch her before she wrapped herself around his legs, laughing breathlessly. He knelt down, stunned. "Hey there," he said softly. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "Elena," he finally heard her name when a nurse passed and said, "Elena, we need you in room 214 after this." Turned at the sound of her daughter's voice. For a brief second, she just stared, wide-eyed. "You," she breathed. Her cheeks flushed slightly, half in surprise, half in embarrassment. Wow, I didn't expect to see you here." Lucas smiled faintly. "Seems the universe had other plans." She looked at his suit, the hospital ID clipped to his coat pocket. "You're visiting someone?" "My mother," he replied quietly. "She's undergoing evaluation for a transplant." Elena's face softened instantly. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said sincerely. "I'll be praying she gets a match soon." For a moment, they just stood there, him holding Sophie's hand, Elena standing a few steps away under the bright hospital lights. Then Sophie piped up, "Mommy, Uncle Airplane looks less tired now." Elena gave a small, apologetic laugh. "She remembers everything." "She's observant," Lucas said, smiling down at the girl. "And kind." Elena nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's Sophie. She believes everyone's just a friend she hasn't met yet." Lucas chuckled quietly. "Sounds like a good philosophy." The hallway buzzed with nurses and soft machine sounds, yet it felt strangely still between them. Two adults caught in a fragile moment stitched together by fate. Before leaving, Lucas said gently, "It was good seeing you again." "Lena," she hesitated. "You too." As she led her daughter away, Sophie waved back enthusiastically. "Bye, Uncle Airplane." Lucas waved, watching until they disappeared around the corner. Then he exhaled, feeling that same quiet warmth return. He had no idea why their paths had crossed again, but deep down, he knew this wasn't coincidence. Something or someone wanted him to find them again. When Lucas returns to St. Anne's the next week, it isn't just to visit his mother. He's about to discover how one woman's quiet strength and one child's laughter can begin to mend the pieces of a life he thought was unfixable. Lucas began visiting St. Anne's Medical Center more often after that. Officially, he told himself it was to check on his mother's test results, but deep down, that wasn't the whole truth. Something about that hallway, that voice, that little girl who called him Uncle Airplane, it drew him back like gravity. He'd catch sight of Elena between shifts, helping patients to their rooms, organizing medication trays, or sitting beside an elderly woman just to hold her hand. She was patient, steady, never hurried. Even in exhaustion, her presence felt. One afternoon, Lucas found her helping an old man adjust his blanket. Sophie sat nearby on a chair, swinging her feet, humming to herself. When Elena looked up and saw him, she smiled faintly, surprised but not unwelcome. "Back again?" she asked, standing to face him. Mom's still waiting for donor results, Lucas said. I was passing by. Of course, she said softly. I hope you get good news soon. He nodded, watching her tuck a strand of hair behind her ear before continuing her work. When her shift ended, they met again by the coffee kiosk near the lobby. Sophie was half asleep in her stroller, her ladybug backpack tucked under her chin. You really don't have to keep visiting, Elena said, stirring her coffee. Lucas smiled lightly. Maybe not. But I find myself wanting to. She raised a brow. Is that your CEO charm talking? Probably the opposite, he said. Most people stop listening when I start using that. Her laugh, low, genuine, caught him off guard. It was the first time he'd heard it, and it lingered. They sat on the bench near the glass wall, watching ambulances pull in under the glowing red emergency sign. The hum of the city outside mixed with the quiet rhythm of the hospital inside. After a pause, Lucas asked, "You've been here long?" "About 2 years," she replied. "Mostly night shifts. I'm a nursing assistant, technically." "Technically?" He repeated. Elena exhaled, eyes distant. "I was in med school. Harvard, actually. 2nd year. But life had other plans." He didn't have to ask what she meant. The way she glanced at Sophie said enough. She wasn't part of the plan, Elena said softly, almost apologetically. But I wouldn't trade her for anything. Still, sometimes I wonder what might have been. Lucas listened in silence, the words settling heavy between them. He'd spent years surrounded by people who spoke in numbers, not feelings. Hearing someone speak with quiet honesty felt disarming. "You ever think about going back?" he asked gently. "All the time," she admitted. "But med school doesn't exactly fit between 12-hour shifts and bedtime stories." He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who still hasn't given up." "I guess not," she said, just paused. Lucas looked at her then. Not the tired nurse, not the single mother, but the woman who had once dreamed of surgery rooms and saving lives. He saw strength there, but also something deeper. Courage wrapped in fatigue. He didn't know what came over him, but that night when he returned home, he couldn't shake her words. On a quiet impulse, he searched his old university shelves and found 2 pristine anatomy textbooks, editions she might have once used. The next day, he left them at the nurse's station with no note. Later that week, she found him waiting at the hospital cafe. "You left those books, didn't you?" she said, arms crossed but smiling faintly. He shrugged. "They were collecting dust." Her smile softened. "Thank you, Lucas, that was kind." He wanted to say "you deserve more than thank you," but he only nodded. Over the next few weeks, their paths kept crossing, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. Lucas began connecting her quietly to people in his professional circle. A retired professor, a medical foundation director, small nudges toward the dream she had put on hold. Elena never asked for any of it, and she never thanked him too much. She just kept showing up, doing her job, loving her daughter, surviving one day at a time, and somehow that steadiness began to heal something inside Lucas too. But the more Lucas tried to help Elena rebuild her dreams, the more he'd realize. She wasn't the only one being saved. The next time their paths cross after hours, everything between them will quietly, irreversibly change. The hospital always felt different at night. The hallways dimmed to a soft glow. Machines hummed in rhythm, and conversations dropped to whispers. For Lucas, those late hours became his refuge. He'd stop by St. Anne's after long meetings, bringing papers to sign for his mother's insurance, or just walking aimlessly through the corridors. Somehow, he always ended up near the East Wing, where Elena's shifts often fell. He told himself it was coincidence. He knew it wasn't. That evening, the sky outside the hospital windows was bruised with rain clouds. He had just finished reviewing donor reports with the transplant team when he passed the small staff break room. The door was cracked open, and the soft hum of a lullaby caught his attention. Inside, under the faint yellow light, Elena sat on a wooden bench still wearing her scrubs. Her hair was messy from a long shift, shoes kicked off, exhaustion written in every movement. Curled in her lap was Sophie, fast asleep, her little ladybug backpack on the floor beside her. Elena rocked gently, humming the tune almost unconsciously. Her eyes were half closed, but her arms held her daughter tightly, as though the world could disappear and she'd still hold on. Lucas stood in the doorway, unmoving. The scene was so quietly human it felt sacred. After a long moment, he slipped off his coat and stepped inside. Without saying a word, he draped it gently over her shoulders. Elena stirred, blinking up at him. "Lucas, didn't mean to wake you," he whispered. She smiled faintly, tired but genuine. "You didn't. I was waiting for her to settle." He crouched beside them. "I'll sit with her. You can rest a bit." For a moment she hesitated. Then, too weary to argue, she nodded and leaned back against the wall. Within seconds, her breathing slowed, her head tipping slightly toward his shoulder. Lucas sat on the floor, legs crossed, watching the child sleep in her mother's arms. Sophie's tiny hand rested over Elena's heart, her fingers twitching in a dream. He felt an ache rise in his chest, one that had nothing to do with exhaustion. He didn't remember the last time he'd seen something so pure. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The hum of distant machines filled the silence until an older nurse passed by the doorway. She stopped, taking in the sight of Elena asleep under Lucas's coat, Sophie curled safely in her arms. The nurse smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and whispered, "No one's ever done that for her before." Lucas said nothing, only nodded. Something inside him twisted at the words. He'd spent years fixing companies, solving problems with strategy and money. But this quiet act of care felt heavier, more meaningful than anything he'd done in a boardroom. For the first time in years, he felt present. Later, when Elena stirred awake, she found him still sitting beside them. "You didn't leave," she said softly. "I didn't want to," he replied simply. Her eyes glistened, though she quickly looked away. "You shouldn't have to see me like this. It's not exactly CEO-level conversation." "Maybe I've had enough of CEO-level conversations," he said. She gave a small laugh, the kind that trembled at the edges. "You're different from what I expected." "So are you," he said, holding her gaze. The silence that followed was charged, tender, real. Sophie stirred between them, and both of them reached to steady her at the same time. Their hands brushed, briefly, accidentally, but the warmth lingered. That night, as Lucas walked out of the hospital, rain misted against the pavement. He stood under the awning for a long time, watching the lights of the ER sign flicker through the drizzle. He had built an empire of logic and control, but for the first time, his heart felt unguarded. He didn't know what this connection was or what it might become, but he knew one thing for certain. He didn't want to go back to the man he was before her. Lucas doesn't realize it yet, but the line between helping and caring is about to blur. The next choice he makes for her will test everything he thought he knew about pride, purpose, and love. Lucas Grant wasn't a man who let things go unfinished. When he saw a problem, he fixed it, whether it was a broken deal, a lagging division, or a missed opportunity. So when he learned that Elena Brooks had once applied to one of his company's medical subsidiaries and been rejected without so much as an interview, something inside him bristled. He hadn't planned to look her up. But one late night in his office, he found himself doing exactly that. The glow from his laptop screen reflected off the dark window as rain streaked down the glass. He typed slowly, "Elena Brooks, applicant file, Hawthorne Memorial Hospital." There it was. Dated 2 years ago. Rejected. Insufficient credentials. Background gap. "No follow-up required." Lucas leaned back in his chair, jaw tightening. There was no mention of her academic record, her grades, or the fact that she'd studied at Harvard before her life had been rerouted by circumstance. Just a lazy rejection stamped by an HR clerk. This was his company, his name on the wall. And someone like her, capable, disciplined, trying, had been dismissed by a system he'd built to value efficiency over empathy. The next morning, he made calls. Quiet ones. He requested a review of hiring protocols across all medical branches. Within a week, he'd personally approved a new initiative. Scholarships and retraining programs for healthcare professionals who had left their studies for personal reasons. No press releases, no speeches, just change. He didn't tell Elena. He wanted it to be right this time, but good intentions have a way of unraveling. 2 days later, Elena showed up at his office. She wasn't smiling. Her hair was still pulled back from her shift, But her eyes, normally calm and kind, were hard with disappointment. "You went through my file," she said without preamble. Lucas stood from behind his desk, startled. "Elena, don't," she interrupted, voice trembling. "You think I wouldn't find out? The hospital called this morning. They said I'd been reconsidered." "I didn't need to be reconsidered. I needed to earn it." He took a step toward her. "I wasn't trying to interfere. I just what, fix me?" Her voice cracked, half anger, half heartbreak. "You think I want a shortcut because I had a child? Because my life didn't go as planned? That's not what this is," he said, firmer now. "You deserved a chance. You didn't get one. I only made sure you did." Her jaw tightened. "You made sure I'd always wonder if it was me or you who got me there." The words hit harder than he expected. She shook her head, tears threatening but never falling. "I trusted you, Lucas, and now I don't even know what this is anymore. Friendship, pity, charity." "Don't call it charity," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you've done for me." "Then you should have told me before you did this," she said, voice low. "Because now it just feels like another person deciding what's best for me." And with that, she turned and left. The sound of the door closing echoed through his glass-walled office like a final verdict. For the rest of the day, Lucas couldn't focus. Her words replayed in his mind until he shut down his computer and left early. The city outside was loud and bright, but he felt nothing. The loneliness he thought he'd escaped was back, heavier this time because it carried her name. That night he sat by his mother's hospital bed, her hand pale and frail in his. She stirred and looked at him. "You look like you've lost something important," she said weakly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I did," his mother's gaze softened. "If she's the reason you're sitting here with that face, don't let pride make it worse. Life's short, Lucas. Sometimes doing the right thing the wrong way still means you cared." He nodded. But her words only made the ache sharper. Hours later, as he drove home through the rain, his phone rang. It was past midnight. The name flashing on the screen made his heart stop. Sophie, video call. He answered instantly. On the other end came Elena's voice, frantic, breaking. "Lucas, please. Sophie's burning up. I can't get her fever down. I don't know what to do." He was out the door before she could say another word. In less than 15 minutes, Lucas's car would screech to a stop outside Elena's apartment. And what happens next will change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the courage to care. Lucas barely remembered the drive. The city lights blurred past his windshield as his heart pounded louder than the storm outside. When he reached Elena's apartment, she was already waiting by the door, her face pale, hair disheveled, eyes wild with fear. "She's in the living room," she said breathlessly. Lucas didn't hesitate. Sophie lay on the couch, flushed crimson, her small body trembling under a damp towel. Her cheeks glistened with sweat, lips dry. The sight of her like that hit Lucas harder than any corporate loss ever could. "She was fine this morning," Elena said, her voice shaking. "Then she started coughing and now her fever's past 103. I can't get it down." Lucas didn't waste a second. He scooped Sophie into his arms, her tiny frame limp against his chest. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly. Elena didn't argue. Within minutes, they were back in the car, sirens wailing faintly in the distance as rain hammered the windshield. Elena sat in the back seat holding Sophie's hand while Lucas drove like a man possessed. At St. Anne's, the ER team took over immediately. Doctors rushed to stabilize Sophie's fever, nurses moving with precision. Lucas stayed by Elena's side, one hand on her shoulder, grounding her as she stared through the glass of the observation room. Hours crawled by. Finally, a pediatrician stepped out and offered a tired smile. "She's responding to treatment. We'll keep her overnight, but she's out of danger now." Elena exhaled for the first time in hours, her legs nearly giving out. Lucas caught her gently, guiding her to a chair. "I thought I was going to lose her," she whispered, tears finally breaking free. "I couldn't. She's all I have." Lucas knelt beside her, his voice low, steady. "She's strong, just like her mother." Elena looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For what I said before, I know you were only trying to help." He shook his head. "No, you were right. I should have asked before deciding what was best for you. I've spent years fixing things that can't be fixed with power or money. But I didn't need to fix you, Elena. He paused, words catching in his throat. I just wanted you to see yourself the way I see you. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but certain. I see you too, she said quietly. Not the CEO, not the man in the suit. Just Lucas. He swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to say anything back. The silence between them was enough. The next morning, the hospital halls filled with the soft glow of sunrise. Sophie was resting peacefully, her little bunny tucked under her arm. Lucas stood at the window of the pediatric room, watching the city wake below. He hadn't left all night. When Elena joined him, still in her scrubs, she looked both exhausted and radiant. You didn't have to stay, she said. I wanted to, he replied simply. For a moment they stood together in the quiet, both watching Sophie breathe steadily. Then Elena took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. There's something I need to tell you, she said, about your mother. Lucas turned, brows furrowing. What about her? Elena hesitated, then continued gently. I had my blood tested. I'm a match. He blinked, not understanding at first. Then the realization hit him like a wave. Elena, no. Absolutely not. She needs a donor, Lucas. I'm healthy, and the doctors said I'm eligible. He shook his head fiercely. You have a daughter. You can't risk this. Elena stepped closer, her voice firm but calm. You said once that my life still has purpose. Maybe this is it. His chest tightened. You don't owe me this. Or her. I know, she said softly. That's why I'm doing it. Lucas looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just courage but love. The same quiet strength that had captivated him on a plane months ago was now standing before him, willing to give life where he could not. He took her hand, his voice breaking. You've already saved me, Elena. You don't have to prove anything. She smiled faintly, tears glimmering. Then let me save her too. As dawn broke over the hospital, Lucas realized, sometimes miracles don't arrive with light from heaven. Sometimes they walk into your life in scrubs and sneakers, holding a little girl's hand. But this miracle would come with a price. The morning of the surgery came quietly. The world outside St. Anne's moved as usual, taxis honking, commuters, hurrying through drizzle. But inside, time seemed to hold its breath. The transplant team prepared in steady silence. Lucas stood in the corridor, staring through the small window of the prep room, heart caught between fear and awe. Elena sat on the gurney in her pale blue gown, her hair tied back loosely. Even under the harsh fluorescent lights, there was calm in her expression, a calm that only comes from certainty. She looked up when Lucas entered. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. I'm not leaving, he replied. She smiled faintly. You always say that. He stepped closer, his throat tight. You don't have to do this. Elena reached for his hand, her fingers warm and steady. Your mother gave you life, Lucas. Let me give her a second one. He shook his head, eyes burning. You've already given me mine. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them filled with everything they couldn't say. Then she whispered, Promise me you'll look after Sophie if anything goes wrong. Don't say that, he said quickly. Promise me. He swallowed hard and nodded. I promise. A nurse appeared in the doorway. It's time. Lucas stayed until they wheeled her away. As the doors swung closed, he pressed his forehead to the glass, whispering a prayer he hadn't said since he was a boy. Hours passed. He sat beside his mother's room, watching IV drips count the seconds. Every sound, the shuffle of feet, the beep of monitors, felt amplified. Then the surgical coordinator finally approached. Mr. Grant, she said gently, the transplant was successful. Both patients are stable. Lucas let out a shaky breath and sat down, his hands covering his face. Relief poured through him like sunlight after weeks of rain. When he was allowed into recovery, he went to his mother first. Her skin looked pale but alive, color slowly returning to her cheeks. She opened her eyes as he entered, and for the first time in months they were clear. "Hey, Mom," he whispered. "You're here," she murmured, smiling weakly. "And I'm still here." He laughed softly through the lump in his throat. "Yeah, you made it." Her gaze drifted toward the next bed, where Elena rested under a blanket, IV lines running from her arms. "That's her, isn't it?" Lucas nodded. "She saved us both," his mother said. "Don't waste that." Later that afternoon, when Elena woke, Lucas was sitting beside her. She blinked slowly, taking in the room. The quiet hum of machines, the sunlight breaking through the blinds. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. "Sore," she said, her voice hoarse, but breathing. "So that's something." He smiled. "More than something." Sophie burst in moments later, wearing a pink headband and carrying her stuffed bunny. She ran straight to her mother, clinging to her carefully. "Mommy, the nurse said you're brave." Elena smiled weakly. "Is that what she said?" "Uh-huh," Sophie nodded. "And Uncle Airplane didn't leave once." Lucas chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You told her that nickname would stick." Elena looked at him for a long time, her eyes soft but full of meaning. "You stayed. Always," he said. Weeks passed. Recovery became routine. Checkups, medications, quiet evenings spent in hospital gardens watching Sophie chase butterflies between benches. One evening, as the sky turned gold, Lucas found Elena sitting by the fountain. "You should be home resting," he said, sitting beside her. "I am home," she replied, smiling. "At least for now." He looked at her, at the woman who had changed everything without even trying. "You know," he said, "I used to think success meant building something big enough that people would never see through it. Turns out it just took one person who did." Elena leaned against his shoulder. "Maybe that's what we're all looking for, someone who sees us and stays." He placed his hand over hers, fingers intertwining naturally. No rush, no grand declaration, just two people sitting in the quiet, knowing something unspoken had finally taken root. A few feet away, Sophie crouched near the fountain, her reflection rippling in the water. She looked up and grinned. "Mommy, Uncle Airplane, look, two suns." Lucas smiled at the reflection, one real, one mirrored, and realized the little girl was right. After everything they'd been through, the world looked brighter, doubled. For the first time in a long while, he felt whole. Months later, as spring settled over the city, Lucas would stand before a crowd announcing a new foundation, the Brooks Grant Initiative, funding education for single parents in medicine. And in the front row, Elena and Sophie would watch, their hands clasped together, as the man who once had everything finally understood what it meant to give it all.